We know how bases are supposed to be captured. It takes manpower, concerted campaigns. Traditionally, bases don't fall unless the attacking side puts boots on the ground. Ukraine just turned tradition on its head. Employing a brutal and brilliant new tactic, Ukraine has just taken control over a key Russian base. This isn't just smart, it's revolutionary. This new approach will be studied for a century. No army has ever taken over a base without sending a single soldier. Ukraine just did. That base is the Donetsk Airport, which Russia has controlled for much of the Ukraine war. That airport is key for Russia. For years, Putin's patsies have been using it as a logistical base through which troops and equipment flow to support the frontline offensive that is supposed to cripple Donetsk. The airport is also a drone base. Russia's unmanned aerial vehicles are being stored and launched from the airport, making the base critical for sustaining pressure on Ukraine's forces and for bombing Ukrainian cities as part of Putin's campaign of terror. The war criminal just got a rude awakening. The Donetsk airport is now under the fire control of Ukraine. That's according to Ukraine's first separate unmanned systems center, which described the operation that Ukraine just pulled off as the first operation of its kind in modern history. Ukraine didn't send soldiers to assault the Donetsk airport. That would have been folly. Those forces would have had to reclaim hundreds, if not thousands of square kilometers of territory just to set up for a big battle over the airport. Tradition went out of the window. Instead, Ukraine's drone operators stayed back, launching wave after wave of brutal metal at the airport. Once heavily fortified, that airport is now under Ukraine's control. Soldiers aren't on the ground, but drones are in the skies, and they're stopping Russia from using Donetsk airport to do damage to Ukraine. This is a game changer for Ukraine. It transforms everything we know about the situation in Donetsk and Putin's future plans for the war. But before we dig into all of that, there's what Ukraine is actually doing at the Donetsk airport to cover. The first separate unmanned systems center gives us the lowdown in a Telegram post, where it explains how Ukraine managed to create fire control over a base without sending a single soldier into the fight. Our strike drone operators are destroying launchers, transport vehicles, and eliminating crews directly on the runway. At the same time, we are systematically hunting for enemy mobile fire groups and air defenses, which forces the enemy to cancel flights, the center said. Translation: Ukraine is hitting everything. Russia has no answers. Ukraine's goal here is to degrade Russia's operational capacity at the base to the point where Donetsk airport becomes unusable. There are parallels with Ukraine's Black Sea campaign here. In that campaign, Ukraine didn't have the warships needed to conduct a traditional naval battle with Russia, so Ukraine took a different route. Using missiles and drones, Ukraine systematically destroyed the Black Sea fleet from afar, taking out a third of it and forcing Russia's ships to withdraw as far away from occupied Crimea as they can get. Now Ukraine has the ability to target air defenses and key military assets throughout the Black Sea and Crimea. That's what we're about to see in Donetsk, and it's killing Putin. Every launch system that Ukraine's drones destroy at the Donetsk airport is a system that Russia can no longer use to send drones into Ukraine's territory. Transport vehicles and personnel being taken out at the airport is a signal that nowhere in the near rear is safe anymore. Those are assets that should be supplying the front lines, but they can't. They've been destroyed. Fuel trucks, storage sites, engineering equipment, it's all needed for the push into Donetsk, and it's all going up in flames as Ukraine takes out the aerodrome ecosystem that Russia has created. This isn't just about fire control, it's about making Donetsk airport such a dangerous place for Russia to operate that it will have no choice but to withdraw from one of the key bases that it's created in the occupied territories. The Black Sea Fleet knows what that feels like, but it won't be able to offer any advice other than to run. And if there is any doubt about the validity of Ukraine's claims, the first separate unmanned systems center has put them to bed. How? Well, the center isn't just saying that it has fire control, it proved it with footage that showcases strike after strike at the Donetsk airport. The 2-minute video is a showcase of the shattering of one of Russia's most vital bases. Over and over, we see views as shot from the Ukrainian middle-range drones as they home in on vehicles, military assets, and soldiers. There is no safe space at the Donetsk airport anymore. Apparently, there are no air defenses that can do anything about Ukraine's drones either. Now there is only one thing: the knowledge that flying catastrophes can descend from the skies at any moment to strike. Russia can't operate in the Donetsk airport, knowing that Ukraine's drones are always ready to strike. What we're seeing here is precisely what the first separate unmanned systems center claims: a world first that will be studied for years to come. An asymmetric approach to neutralizing bases and making them unusable for the enemy. Serafim Hordienko, who goes by the call sign Falco and is a commander who was involved in the planning of this unique operation, explains. Fire control over Donetsk Airport is an example of an asymmetric operation in which relatively small forces disrupted the enemy's operational strategic plans, Hodienko proclaims. Ukraine is effectively taking out every scrap of infrastructure that Russia has set up at Donetsk Airport. That equipment makes the base function. Without it, Russia just has some airfields and hangars that it can't use without being blown up. Putin will be hoping for a reprieve. He and his generals will look toward past attacks against the Donetsk airport and hope that what Ukraine is doing now mirrors those strikes. Back in March, Ukraine used a combination of Storm Shadow or Scalp missiles and US-made ATACMS to hit the airport, damaging a launch site used for Shahid drones. Before that, in both November and December 2025, Ukraine had struck drone storage facilities at Donetsk airport. So it's not like Ukraine hasn't hit this vital Russian base before. But this time is different. These earlier strikes were isolated. Damaging, yes, but Russia knew that once the attack was over, it could get back to the business of using Donetsk airport to hurt Ukraine. That isn't the case anymore. Ukraine's strategy has evolved. What was once a strategy of jabbing Russia in the face and then backing off has become a whirling dervish of haymakers being flung at the defenseless Donetsk airport. These aren't solitary strikes anymore. They're systematic, calculated. Over and over, Ukraine hits the airport. A key Donbass battlefield has fallen out of Russia's control. An airport that has been an early symbol of the fighting in Ukraine ever since Russia launched its campaign of aggression in 2014 is no longer safe. Russia has managed to control Donetsk Airport for over a decade. Now it no longer does. Not long ago, the occupiers felt safe there and were planning terrorist attacks on our cities. From now on, we have turned Donetsk Airport into a trap for the enemy, the first separate unmanned systems center says in its statement. But Donetsk Airport is not just a trap. It's becoming a hellscape as Ukraine isn't going to stop. Fire control has been established. Now Ukraine is on the hunt. But before we tell you what happens next and why Ukraine pulling off yet another world first is such a game changer in this war, this is a quick reminder that you are watching The Military Show. If you're getting insight from the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what we have coming next. The first separate unmanned systems center statement was capped with a chilling threat. It is impossible to hide and defend yourselves. Ukraine is already proving that this statement isn't just bluster. With fire control established, Ukraine's drones are on the hunt for anything and everything Russian at the airport. Fire groups that are supposed to be protecting the Donetsk airport are now having to deal with Ukraine's drones. The same goes for Russia's mobile air defense units, which utterly failed to prevent the wave of attacks that granted Ukraine the fire control, and are now being destroyed to ensure that more of Ukraine's drones can arrive to turn the airport into a hellscape for Russia. Flight operations are already being cancelled. Activities at the Donetsk airport are being cut back due to the constant threat that Ukraine's drones pose. This is brilliant and brutal by Ukraine. First, Ukraine established drone-based fire control. Now it's using those very same weapons to ensure that this control is maintained. For Putin, this is terrible for his plans in Donetsk. Ukraine is at the point where it can systematically degrade the infrastructure at Donetsk airport, and there's not much that Russia can do about it except watch as key assets are blown up. This is a nightmare for Putin on the Donetsk front. As Medusa reported on June 6th, Putin is still trying to claim that Russian troops are advancing on every single front. Putin is lying. The push for Kramatorsk, which is one of the Donetsk fortress belt cities, is practically at a standstill. Now Medusa says analysts are suggesting that Ukraine will likely hold the city through the rest of 2026. That's not exactly great for Putin, considering he's had a deadline of September 2026 for the complete collapse of the Donbass. Donetsk has to fall for that collapse to happen. And right now it's looking like Russia won't even take one of the 4 fortress belt cities that it needs by the end of the year. Now think about what Ukraine's obtaining fire control over the Donetsk airport really means for Russia. Ukraine isn't going to stop. The systematic destruction of everything that Russia has built up at the base is next on the agenda. Ukraine is going to keep hunting, unrelenting, unstoppable. The drones will fly and the infrastructure will burn until there's nothing left at the airport. One way or another, Ukraine will win. Either the drones destroy everything or Russia withdraws. There is no good scenario for Putin here. On the front, Putin's forces will feel the pain. Those forces are already dying in record numbers to gain just the smallest scraps of territory. May was a particularly bad month. According to The Guardian, Russia took just 14 square kilometers of Ukraine in May, despite raising the number of offensives it conducted by 37.5%. In return for those paltry gains, Russia sacrificed over 30,000 of its soldiers, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an open letter to Putin published in June. Of those casualties, 63% are deaths, while only 37% are injuries. That's the situation right now. Throw Ukraine taking fire control over the Donetsk Airport into the mix and you have a horror show for Russia's soldiers at the front. They won't be getting drone support anymore. The Donetsk Airport launch sites are being destroyed. Reserves and supplies can't flow through the airport anymore, leaving Putin's patsies as little more than meat to be fed into the grinder. Even if Russia comes up with alternative routes, the delays that Ukraine's brutal strategy ensures means that these alternatives won't mean much to the troops being ordered to assault Ukraine's positions in Donetsk. The numbers are only going to get bigger from here on out, and none of them will make for good reading for Putin. An already glacial advance will come to a standstill. And that brings us nicely to why all of this matters for the Ukraine war. Let's focus on drones. Ukraine hasn't pulled off a world first at the Donetsk airport for no reason. The entire point was to shatter a key logistical node that has proven itself to be increasingly vital for Russia's strategy of unleashing drones against Ukraine's defenses and cities. However, the airport has also become increasingly important as a drone center for Russia in recent months. In March, Militani reported that Russia had started construction work at the Donetsk airport. New hangars were being built, likely to serve as storage facilities for Russia's drones. Satellite photographs revealed that there were 11 new buildings under construction in just one location. And in another, close to taxiway C1 at the airport, another facility was being built, possibly to serve as a launch pad or garage for Russian drones. That work uncoincidentally began after the Ukrainian missile strikes that we mentioned earlier, which wiped out several of Russia's drone storage facilities at the airport. And what it shows us is that Russia was still extremely active at the airport just a few months before Ukraine established fire control. By June 2nd, Russia had created more than 130 shelters and garages specifically for drones. Other facilities were still under construction when Ukraine sent in drones of its own. Don't underestimate how vital drone strikes are to Putin's strategy for Ukraine. As his soldiers fail to advance in any meaningful way on the ground, Putin has increasingly relied on Shahid drones to cause damage to Ukraine in the rear and across the front. May was the perfect example of that. France 24 reports that Russia fired 8,150 drones at Ukraine in May. That was a monthly record that came on the back of several other record-breaking months. Ukraine did a good job of stifling Russia's drone assault, intercepting 91% of those launched, the same outlet reports. However, what we're now seeing at the Donetsk airport is Ukraine taking a different approach. It will still destroy drones in the air, but if Ukraine can take out the source, Russia's drones become less of a problem. The Donetsk airport had become a major source of drone strikes for Russia. Now it's being rendered useless as Ukraine's fire control will force Russia's forces so far back that they either won't be able to launch drones or they'll have to launch in lower volumes due to not having a solid launch site in place. Either way, that's a win for Ukraine. Looking at this through a wider lens, we also see that Ukraine's campaign against Russia's logistical backbone has leveled up. The campaign has already been causing major problems for Putin in recent weeks. On May 30th, the BBC reported that Ukraine's military has started to use AI-powered drones to conduct strikes against Russian supply vehicles, many of which were driving on routes connecting Russia to occupied Crimea. The BBC verified 14 strikes, but there have been many more than that. Ukraine has created a highway to hell in the occupied territories by absolutely hammering the R280 land corridor between Russia and Crimea. A logistical lockdown, as Ukraine calls it, is in play, and it's hurting Russia all over the front. The Donetsk airport is just another example of this lockdown strategy. Now that Ukraine has middle-range drones and it's confident in the strength of its fortifications and kill zones on the front, it can focus on hurting Russia in the rear. Remember that Russia is the invading force here. It needs its logistical network to run as efficiently as possible to keep the pressure on Ukraine. When nodes like the Donetsk airport come under Ukraine's fire control, we start to see Russia lose control on the front. That's already evident in the remarkably slow rate of advance that we've already mentioned. But nothing is going to plan for Putin right now. Ukraine is pulling off feats with its drones that will be studied for years, and it's doing it in Crimea, Donetsk, and even inside Russia, as we saw on the eve of the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, when Ukraine sent drones to strike oil terminals and facilities in Putin's hometown, as a reminder that the war is still very much being brought to Russia. All of this gives Putin an even bigger problem than the loss of the Donetsk airport would suggest. Russia's leader is running out of options, which means that he's losing leverage. On the options front, Ukraine gaining fire control over Donetsk airport is going to be another major contributor to the standstill that now impacts the Russian army on the ground. As his troops are being churned up, all that Putin has left in his arsenal are drones and missiles. That's why we've seen record-breaking numbers of drones launched at Ukraine in May. Even though over 90% of those drones are being intercepted, Russia has to launch them in such massive numbers to stand any chance of doing damage to Ukraine. Putin's forces have also started to rely more heavily on ballistic missiles in recent months for the same reason, but that's not a sustainable strategy. Russia is already dealing with an air defense missile drought as it struggles to produce enough defensive missiles while dealing with the weight of Western sanctions and Ukraine's long-range drone strikes. Boosting the ballistic missile aspect of its long-range strategy may work for Russia in the short term, but it also means that Putin is burning through stockpiles that can't be easily replaced. Once those stockpiles dwindle, we'll be back to the lower levels of launches, while Ukraine continues to cripple Russia in the rear. Ultimately, this means that Putin has no leverage. He can't crow about gains in Ukraine because there are none. Just 14 square kilometers taken in a month shows that Russia's offensive is falling apart. Ukraine will keep on hitting the rear harder and harder. The Donetsk Airport being under fire control wounds Russia, but Ukraine is going to twist the knife as it strikes deeper into Donetsk and continues its Crimean campaign. Putin wants the world to believe that Ukraine is weak, but the evidence is there for all to see that not only does Ukraine have plenty of fight left, but that it's getting stronger in key aspects of the war. Don't get us wrong, Putin will continue to talk as though Russia is winning the war. He may not even realize that things are as bad for Russia as they are in Donetsk. In a June 5th report, the Institute for the Study of War pointed out that Putin is refusing peace discussions because he believes that Russia is winning on the battlefield. Those claims aren't compatible with what's really happening, which suggests that Putin is being fed false information by his military commanders about the state of his forces in Donetsk. Putin might not even know that Ukraine has fire control over the Donetsk Airport. He spent his career surrounding himself with yes-men who are now too terrified to deliver the wake-up call that Putin needs. All the while, Ukraine continues to expand its air game. Naval vessels, railway infrastructure, air defenses, and now entire airports are on the menu for Ukraine. That's the game-changing difference that a new generation of middle-range strike drones has made. Putin may not be aware of it. He may continue to order assaults as though his entire invasion isn't falling apart, but eventually, all of this is going to come back to haunt Russia. We're already seeing the failure of Putin's spring and summer offensive in real time. But now that Ukraine has the blueprint for creating fire control over a base using nothing but drones, it's only going to get worse for Russia. Donetsk Airport is just the starting point. Next up, the entire Russian rear. And the next time that Ukraine decides to strike in Donetsk, it may well use a never-before-seen weapon that has been key to the country's mid-range strategy in Crimea. The Morrigan drone is here. Inspired by the Celtic god of war, Ukraine's drone is crippling Russia's Crimean logistics and drawing ever closer to liberating the peninsula. Find out more in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show to see how Ukraine is turning the tide against Russia in 2026. And thank you for watching.